And I think with allergy, what struck me the most is the fear that is always seems to go hand in hand with allergy that isn't there in some of those other conditions. And I think it's just the nature of it. It's like you can avoid a cat if you're allergic to a cat, but you can't stop eating.
Could you do me a massive favour and click follow or subscribe button? It helps the podcast out so much. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Make and Tame podcast. So I'm joined by Rebecca Knibb, and I had Karen Murphy on the podcast and Professor Adam Fox, and everyone's like, you need to have Rebecca on the podcast. You obviously got over 25 years experience, kind of looking at kind of allergies, but also kind of the mental implications. I think it's something which you spoke about more now than it ever has before. Would you like to do like a little introduction to the listeners for anyone who might not have come across your work before?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Yeah, well, I'm Rebecca Knibb. As you said, I've been working in this area for 25, 30 years. And I trained as a psychologist and fell into this area completely by accident, really. I was just looking around for a job after getting my degree and getting a master's and just applying for all sorts of things, and ended up with running a research project at Birmingham University looking at why people self-diagnose. And in 1995, I think it was, when I first got that job, nobody had heard of food allergy at all. It wasn't really spoken about. I didn't know about food allergies. It's
like a taboo, isn't it? Like, I imagine, it wasn't really spoke about at all, kind of thing. No, if you go back to like the very start, even like before uni, did you always have a passion for kind of psychology? Where did that come from?
No, not really. No. I was going to join the army. I was just going to go off and do, physical activity stuff, and I thought I'll join the army. And then I spoke to somebody and they said, well, why don't you do a degree because you're doing your A-levels? And I literally flipped through a prospectus and went, psychology, that looks interesting, I'll go and do that. Yeah. That was it. It was really by chance.
Was you quite active then, would you say, when you was younger, in terms of like wanting to like join the army and do something quite physical?
Yeah, I was. I quite like some physical stuff. Always have been. We're myself, husband, son, always do lots of sort of physical activity things, and my background really with my family was sort of police force. So it was either do I want to join the police force? No, not really. What do I really want to do? I didn't really have much direction, and nobody in my family had really been to university before me either. So I wasn't like following anybody's footsteps, and I wasn't really that fussed about going to university. But then when I went, I loved it, and I loved psychology, and I just loved the area, and I loved the application to practice. So I loved the types of psychology like health and clinical forensic, where you can look at the research, but you can apply it to people's lives, and then you can try and make things better for people. And that's what really grabbed me, I think.
Yeah. Whereabouts did you go to university then?
I went to university in Hertfordshire. It was Hatfield Poly at the time. Oh, nice.
Not too far.
Yeah. And then turned into University of Hertfordshire while I was there. So it sounded a lot posher when I graduated than when I started.
That's all right then,
yeah. Yeah. And so it was great.
So when you kind of stepped into kind of the world of psychology, was it everything? Obviously, you got into food allergies later on, like But I mean, what did you study then? Did you say you studied crime as well?
Yeah. Well, I wanted, because my family background was sort of police force, and my husband, who I met then 30 years ago, was working in a sort of acute psychiatry setting. I really like that side of things. I think, do I want to be a clinical psychologist, which is very, very popular now? Do I want to go into forensic, be a clinical forensic psychologist? Do I want to work for the Home Office? So I applied for a master's in criminology and got an award from the ESRC, the Economic and Social Research Council, to pay for my master's, basically. So that was really, really helpful. They paid for my fees and everything. So I went and did that and thought, I could apply for some jobs. And then I did some voluntary experience on an acute psychiatric ward, and went, whoa, oh, I'm not sure about this.
Yeah. It's like questioning
the
it then, yeah.
reality, yeah, really
hit you.
quite a stressful, frightening environment. One that I'm used to now, but when I was 21, it was quite a shock. And I wasn't quite so sure then on what do I want to do. So then I just started applying for anything that seemed vaguely interesting. As you do, you're just looking or hunting around for a job. And that's when I got offered the job at Birmingham University.
And that was that your first kind of step into the world of allergies?
Yeah. First time I'd really read anything about allergy. First time that I'd really done anything that was very heavily research focused. So you do some research projects as an undergraduate and when you do your masters, but then you're thrown in to run this huge research project, and you learn very quickly, and you either love it or hate it probably. And I just loved the world of research and found that I really enjoyed working in that field, that allergy field. And there wasn't anything around psychology of allergy at the time, nothing at all. There weren't any published papers. The first papers to come out looking at that sort of thing were around about the time I started. So around about 1999 were when the first papers started coming out. So I found myself the only psychologist going off to conferences and talking about this. And people saying, what's psychology got to do with allergy?
Yeah, even now there's very few of people like yourself, and I thought that's why it's great to get you on, because I love to kind of pick your brain, like what was it like 25 years ago in the world of allergies? I mean, imagine, was it no one knew at all really about the severities of it?
Yeah, it's very, very different to now. So people were only just starting to hear about allergy. The media were only just starting to talk about it. But we knew from a bit of research that had been published that lots of people thought they had symptoms from food and were sort of self-diagnosing what was going on. So they might say, oh, I think I've got a food allergy, or I think I've got a food intolerance, but not really being able to get to a doctor. There were the allergy clinics in the sense that we have them now. And that has all grown in the last sort of 25 years. And as a psychologist working in that field, there was nothing. There was just me in the UK. I didn't hear about anybody else working in other areas in allergy at the time. And I'd go to the British Allergy Conference with a little poster, and I'd stand there talking about the impact of allergies on people's emotional well-being. And the clinicians.
What was people's response to that as well? Yeah, I was going to say, what was people's response like 25 years ago when you're there, like you say, with your poster talking about allergy and obviously the mental implications of that? What was people's like kind of initial response to you doing that?
The response was really interesting because the clinicians were like, "Oh, this is interesting. Oh, psychology, I haven't thought of that before." And when I started publishing the work that I was doing as part of the research project, and I was doing my PhD alongside, some of the big names in allergy, like Hugh Sampson and Gideon Lack, started to hear about it. And I got asked to give some talk to some really big audiences, which was, at the time, extremely scary. I had no idea. It was really nerve-wracking. I got invited to London to give a talk. And I just thought it'd be a room, 30, 40 people. And I got there and there was this huge auditorium with 300 people in and people standing outside watching screens. And Hugh Sampson, there over from America, who's one of the huge names in allergy, saying, and I'm really interested to hear what Rebecca's going to say. And I'm like,
all this pressure on you just before you step out.
Yeah. And so at the time, there was very little. And there was lots of articles out about, is allergy all in the mind? So it was a lot about, are people just making this up? Even as even 25 years ago, they were talking about that. Whereas now, the landscape's completely changed. And now every clinician wants a psychologist. Every clinician knows that psychology is really important. And they're really supportive and they're really on board. And now we get, as psychologists, I don't stand there with my little poster. I now get invited to conferences as a speaker. So
that's amazing.
That's how it's changed, and it's
A
been really
full
nice to
circle,
see
yeah.
that.
Yeah, what was that first kind of big kind of research project? So obviously, I imagine you've done quite a few over the years.
Yeah.
What was that kind of the first project you kind of underwent?
So that first project was looking at why people self-diagnosed. So some work had been published showing that if you ask people, do you have an allergy? And then you bring them into the clinic and you give them skin prick tests or food challenges, there's a huge discrepancy between the two. So about, in the late 1990s, we had about 20% of people in the UK thinking they had allergy or intolerance or some sort of reaction to food, bring them into clinic. And for adults, only 1 or 2% were reacting. So the project was funded by the predecessor of the Food Standards Agency. It was called MAFF, so Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food. So they funded the project to look at why are people doing this? Why are they self-diagnosing? Why do they think they've got an allergy? Are they getting it right and self-treating by avoiding? Or are they getting it wrong and then avoiding unnecessarily foods? So we did this huge study. We interviewed 300 people and we sent out surveys across the whole of Birmingham, and we did this huge piece of work. And there was no easy answer. Some people were getting it right, some people were getting it wrong, but they were getting it wrong for good reasons. So they might think they have an allergy because they'd eaten a food and got symptoms, but it might not have been an allergic reaction. It might have been something completely different, and they just put it down to allergy. And so that was it. They avoided the food forevermore after that.
No, that's interesting. I was going to say, when you kind of start looking at the mental implications of that and kind of doing the research, what was your initial response to when you kind of really got into it and you kind of find out the findings? Was it quite surprising?
For that project, it was really surprising, yeah. And we looked at all sorts of things like personality. Did that have an impact? Different demographics, was that connected? But it was looking back now, I thought, we've just looked at everything we could look at in terms of psychology and allergy. And looking back now, we were just scratching that surface of what was going on. And it wasn't until I started talking to some clinicians who are working in allergy, particularly down in Southampton, where they do a lot of, there's big centres down in Southampton, they do a lot of allergy work. Talking to the clinicians there about what they were seeing coming through clinic. And they said, it'd be really interesting to look at quality of life, anxiety, these sorts of things, and look at it in the family. So try and look at it in mums and in dads and in the child with a peanut allergy was what we focused on, and their brothers and sisters. And that's the study I did with Jonathan Hurricane and Rosie King, who worked, both were working in Southampton at the time. And that study is one of the only studies looking at the whole family dynamic and getting them all to fill in measures and getting dads to fill in scales saying how anxious they are, which was really surprising what they were telling us.
When I think about how I got raised, and I've had an allergy since the age of 5, and like the way I got brought up and stuff, I think because there was a bit of maybe lack of understanding in 1992 that like the parents always made me feel empowered, but I don't think they kind of wrapped me up in too much cotton wool kind of thing. And I still went out and did things, but I used to bring my own food or whatever. I think like some parents now, because of the news and the media, like they carry a lot of that anxiety along with them, which can easily kind of transfer onto the kids. What's your kind of research into that? Do you find like is there a link between if the parent is super anxious, then the kid can really pick up on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think allergy is one of those conditions, particularly allergy, rather than some of the other sensitivities to food, but particularly allergy has a lot of fear connected to it because of that potentially life-threatening nature of it, that, you're never quite sure when your child's going to have a reaction and how serious that reaction might be. So there is a lot of fear and there's a lot of anxiety. And there are certain things that I think have heightened that. So there's been, over the last probably 10 years, a lot of media attention, particularly on the more severe end and the deaths, unfortunately. And they are rare, thankfully, but they do happen. And so, of course, as a parent, when you hear that, that's going to make you very anxious if your child has a similar allergy. So there's a huge amount of fear and anxiety, and it can also be increased by the way that the parent or patient might interact with sort of healthcare service. So, if they're told, this is really serious, this is really severe, and you've got to avoid everything, of course they're going to go away feeling really, really anxious. And that anxiety can transmit to the child as well. So we do see that. Anxious parents, you get anxious children. And if you have anxious parents, you then tend to have a bigger impact on the family. Then they're less likely to want to go out to eat or go on holidays or let the child sleep over at friends, those sorts of things, because of that anxiety. So we do see that. We do see that more and more. It doesn't seem to be going away. But what I think we're finding is that because healthcare professionals know about this, and we talk about this quite a lot, that they know about the language they can use and the things that they can say which can reduce anxiety. Because if you leave it to run on its own, it can just snowball and just get worse and worse. Yeah.
Because I think I was going to ask as well in regards to kind of, I think a lot of people feel a bit lost of like where to go to when the kid has got kind of allergy anxiety.
Yeah.
And I feel like I find it so fascinating because when I was growing up, it wasn't something I ever experienced, like never experienced anxiety as a kid, but I feel now it's more on the rise now. Do you see that with the studies you're doing, that more children now are getting anxiety with food allergies than ever before?
That's a really interesting question, because I don't think we have the data that shows that, because we don't have that longitudinal data. We are looking now at anxiety more than we used to. I think a lot of the early research focused very much on quality of life. And then we now have a lot more research that looks at the mental distress as well, so anxiety and mood and depression. We've only just started to develop measures that can measure anxiety that is related to food. Because what we were finding, if we tried to measure general anxiety just using a very general, generic scale, it wasn't picking up particularly high levels of anxiety, because it'd be, phobias or anxiety about everyday things, which generally children, even if they have a food allergy, they're not generally anxious. It's the food that creates the anxiety. So we now have some measures to look at food-related worry, and they're going to be really helpful in us trying to measure how anxious children are. But I think as a society, children, growing up now have an awful lot more to cope with, I think, than when I grew up, or perhaps even when you grew up. I mean, they've had to come through COVID, but on top of that, there's all of the social media that they now interact with, that we never had. We didn't have. Even I didn't have it. Yeah, like I remember Facebook getting introduced in like year 9. But then you didn't have it on your phone, like no. Maybe at the end of the day, people. But I didn't get Facebook until my final year of high school, which is it's mad when I compare it to now. They've got bloody TikTok, right, Instagram, Facebook, and I think it can be quite overwhelming as well. On top of allergies and everything else. Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's a lot that they have to try and cope with and deal with as they're growing up. Not just that change in identity and that, your growing teenage brain and everything you have to deal with biologically, and then you've got everything you need to deal with socially and with your friends, and then we have social media on top of that. And I think teenagers generally are really struggling. I know mental health in that sort of age group, particularly in girls at the moment, is much worse than it really ever used to be. So you think about all of that, and then think about having to manage an allergy on top of that. I think the landscape's very different now to what it was 20 years ago. Yeah.
What advice would you give to kind of like parents who I've got a kid with a food allergy in regards to finding that resource? Because I know there isn't many kind of clinical kind of psychologists like yourself. I know I spoke to Karen Murphy within that area. What is that kind of first kind of step into getting that support?
I think it is really tricky, and it all does depend where you live as well. So, if you live in London and you go to the Evelina for your child's allergy, you've got a whole load of really great psychologists down there who you can get referred to. If you live somewhere else in the country, or if, further north in England, if you live in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, just seeing you're really going to struggle. So I think the first thing perhaps is to find out whether, if you are already struggling, sometimes just talking to your clinician or the dietitian at the allergy clinic, sometimes that can just alleviate some of those fears. There might be something specific that you're quite anxious about that you just want to talk over. And the healthcare professionals in the allergy clinic are really good at that and might be able to help with certain things in clinic. If there are, if you are really struggling or your child is and you're thinking you do need some help and need referring to a psychologist, I guess the first thing to do is ask whether there is that route for you to be referred to, because for some hospitals there might be and for others there might not. But for everybody, there is information out there that you can access. So Anaphylaxis UK and Allergen UK, their websites are fantastic and they have huge amounts of information that is specifically tailored for parents and for children. I know Anaphylaxis UK have just released their online resources for anxiety related to allergy specifically. So I would say go there and have a look through that information. That's going to be really helpful. There are things we're trying to do research-wise to try and improve psychological services and think about putting on, free online modules that patients and parents might be able to access, but we aren't there yet. So, that's coming and we're trialing those and we're hoping that we'll have something that will be of help and support and free to access at any time. But at the moment, it's you're right here, right now, needing some help. I'd say go to the charity websites and go back to your allergy clinic if you can, your GP if you need to go through there to ask whether there's a route through to getting some further support.
Yeah, no, that's great. I was going to ask, you kind of spoke earlier when you first kind of got into the world of allergies and psychology, you kind of spoke about the quality of life. What was your kind of key findings from that, which you kind of found out about?
Well, most of the research that we've done over the last 20 years has had some element of quality of life in there. So I think that in particular, we find that quality of life, particularly around social life, is what's impacted, and emotional quality of life. These are the things really that seem to be having food allergy has the greatest impact on. Things like your environment and your physical quality of life tend to be fairly good because if you've only got an allergy and you haven't got things like asthma and eczema as well, if you've only got allergy, you're generally really well unless you eat something that you're not supposed to. So
rather than worrying about everything else kind of thing.
Yeah. So it tends to be sort of the emotional side of things and then the social side, because anything that food is related to is related to sort of social life and eating. So they're the sort of the biggest impact on quality of life. But then we went on from there to look at, well, what things can improve quality of life for people. So things like how people manage their food allergy or their child's food allergy, their confidence in managing it, their ability to read food labels, and their ability to perhaps plan ahead so that they can go out to eat, and those sorts of things can improve quality of life. But what we found that on the flip side of that is all of the checking behaviour you have to do reduces your quality of life. So all of the reading the food labels, so having to talk to a member of staff if you go to a restaurant, having to ask the chef, having to
quite nerve-wracking as well, I think, for some people. For me, I've always felt quite confident, and I've always been trying to use the platform to empower people, but I can understand why some people can feel quite nerve-wracking having to bring it up around strangers or new people for the first time.
Yeah, definitely. It is. And so what we try and say to particularly parents is try and get your children to do that as early as possible. So get them to do the asking, get them to read the menus, get them to read the food labels. Yeah, just so to build up that confidence. I even do a bit of role play with them if they say, oh, I don't really want to go and ask when we go to the restaurant. Then you could do some role play with them to say, well, I'll pretend to be, you know, the waiting person, the wait staff, and you ask me. So that can help, because we do find that that people do struggle. They don't want to be, particularly teenagers, young adults, they don't want to make a fuss. They don't want to look different. They don't want to, particularly if they've not told their social group they're going out with, their friends, that they have an allergy. They're not going to speak up and say something if they go out to eat.
Do you feel like when they kind of take on that responsibility, that's when it can get a bit difficult? Because obviously, like they're kind of moving away from home, they haven't got the parents kind of looking after them. Is that when you kind of see a spike in like people having anaphylactic shots or having these kind of severe allergic reactions?
Yeah, we certainly say that sort of young adult age group is the sort of the most at risk of having more severe reactions. So there are a number of reasons. Yes, they're doing more things on their own. They're becoming more independent. Parents are not there to check for them. They're going out with their friends. They may be risk assessing, but maybe not in the way we'd want them to risk assess.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, I'm not going to take my gelling pen with me today because I'm not going to eat, so I don't want to take it. So that's my rationale. Yeah. That's my risk assessment.
I was going to say as well, I get a lot of like parents where the kids are just like not carrying their auto injectors, and like they always ask me like, how do you get them to carry it? And I'm like, I don't know. It came, for me, it's like habit now. It's like phone, wallet, keys, everything. I just never forget it. Do you find that a lot of kids then, or teenagers shall say, just don't carry it with them when they should be?
Yes, but I think I'd say that it's not a blanket, they never carry it. I think that they do. Certainly the young adults, teenagers we've spoken to will go through some sort of process to think, well, do I need it today when I go out? Am I just going around to my friends around the corner? I don't need it. Am I just going to go and play football and I'm not going to be eating anything, so I don't need it? And other times they will take it. So we find that it isn't they take it everywhere. But obviously that's the habit you want to get them into. That, as you say, that they just do a check. They've got the house keys, they've got the money, they've got the phone, they've got the pen. That's, they've got everything and they can take it with them. I think obviously, particularly for young lads, how bulky it is an issue. I think less of an issue with, when sort of man bags came into fashion, so they could have their bag and they could.
I know a lot of people said that to me when I go abroad. I think because I'm only one of the very few kind of male kind of advocates out there with a food allergy who talks about it online. I get a lot of mums like, oh, do you wear like a man bag or a bum bag or whatever when I'm abroad? I'm like, no, I put it in my swimming trunks, or I get my mate to carry one and I carry one. But yeah, I think some parents are like, well, you don't have two. And I was like, I do have two. Like my mate's always like with me.
Yeah.
I was going to ask as well, do you find that like the media now and it being constantly at the forefront of the news, like the allergy death, do you think that has made a massive impact on like people's anxiety and kind of mental health now having a food allergy?
I think it's done a few things. I think it's raised awareness, which is great. We've had some new laws come in around labelling, which has also been really an excellent move and is helping people to be able to be a bit more confident in eating out, because they are a bit more confident in the labelling, perhaps, of the food. I think on the flip side, it can make people more anxious. I think it also has possibly led to food businesses being much more risk averse. So maybe saying, sorry, we can't cater for you at all. Because we either get really, really good service where they're absolutely excellent, they really know what they're doing, you feel really confident and they really look after you. Or you get the sort of, no, I'm sorry, or they have to sign a disclaimer. So we have had parents tell us that they have had to sign a disclaimer before they are able to eat in a restaurant.
But I think it's important. Like, I spoke to a few people about this disclaimer, and they're saying it's not worth the paper it's written on. And I mean, if someone asks me to sign a waiver, I think I'll tell them where to go. But yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because everywhere I eat now, they say, like, look, we can't guarantee. I was like, I understand that, and like, because people say, how do you eat out? And I was like, well, just make sure they don't cook with too much nuts. Or if you start that dialogue, make sure that they understand like how serious your allergy is. Even if they say we can't guarantee it, it's just it's them like trying to save the backs. But I mean, it's a tricky one. Yeah, it's a tricky ground in it, really.
It is, and I've heard that parents and adults as well, you know, with allergy, are now starting to say, you know, if they go to a restaurant, they're saying, I have a serious allergy. So they're trying to get it across that, you know, this is something serious, that if you get this wrong, this could potentially have really serious consequences. But I think there is a lot more awareness now, but I think, again, it's perhaps a little bit biased towards the peanuts and the nuts. So if you say to somebody, if you go out to eat and you say, I've got a serious peanut allergy, then, you know, they either say, well, we really can't cater for you, or everything is done to make sure that you're safe. But if you just say, I've got a milk allergy, which can also result in a very serious reaction, the awareness of those sorts of allergies are just not as high, I don't think. And so food businesses might not be as careful with some types of allergy than others. And we have heard as well, we've talked to people with celiac disease or various intolerances, lactose intolerance, for example, who said, I don't even just try and explain that. I just say I have an allergy, otherwise they don't take me seriously. So there is still a lot of misconceptions and misunderstandings.
I've heard people do that before, but I feel like, say someone's celiac, and I've had people on the podcast who are celiac, and I think if they turn around and they said they had an allergy in a restaurant, then it kind of like, does the messaging then get a little bit lost? Then people thinking, well, if the next person comes in and they've got an allergy, they're going to take it less serious because everyone is saying it now, even if they don't have a serious allergy. And it's a really tricky ground. And I think a lot of them are really honest who I've had on the podcast. And like, I think they just say, oh, I'm celiac, can you just make sure? But I think people just sometimes think it's the same thing. It's like, I'm not just going to get a dicky stomach. Like it could potentially kill someone. So it's a really tricky ground to kind of.
It is tricky ground. It's really It is, and it's because it's a very complex area as well. Because obviously, you know, celiac is a allergy, just not IgE. And you can't go into a restaurant and say, well, you know, the IgE allergy, non-IgE allergy, lactose intolerance. They'll just go, what? what are you talking about?
What you want about? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a complex area anyway. So people understandably get a little bit that unless they've been and had a diagnosis and told this is what you have, it can be tricky to work out what you do have. And even if you have got a diagnosis, sometimes it can be really confusing to know, well, what is it, and how do I have it, and how does it work, and how does this reaction occur? It's and for me, that's one of the fascinating things about the area as well, because, you know, not every patient is different, every person is different, because the way they react and how they might react on any one day is different to how they may react on another day and to another person with the same type of allergy. And that's what makes it such a complex area. And I think that's why psychology is so important, to try and look at this and try and help people work their way through it and manage their way through this maze of this field of allergy.
I'll also ask to get your kind of advice on kind of like allergy anxiety when eating out in a restaurant. Like, is it allergic reaction or is it a panic attack? And it'd be great to get your thoughts on this. It's something from a selfish point of view I struggle with, but when I did like an Instagram stories where the audience could ask questions, it's a question which got brought up quite a lot actually, about people really struggling. Whether is it a panic attack, is it allergic reaction? What advice would you give to some people out there?
I say it's a really good question, because a lot of the panic symptoms are very similar to an allergic reaction symptom. And we have the same with asthma as well. So you can have a panic attack, I think it's an asthma attack, and it's not, it's a panic attack. Yeah. So it's not just food allergy, it's that those sorts of other conditions as well can a panic attack can mimic it. I think whatever you're going through is going to be scary. A panic attack's scary. Whether you realise it's a panic attack or think it's a reaction to food. I think obviously the thing is that if it's a panic attack, your adrenaline's not going to work.
Yeah.
So your adrenaline, it will be, you take your EpiPen or your Dex or whatever adrenaline pen you've got for an allergic reaction. But if you're having a panic attack, you're pumping adrenaline out and you're just giving yourself some more.
Yeah, well, it's so mad. I was in a situation where I had something I didn't realize that I'd may contain, and I don't want to go and tell this story too much. I've definitely told it before, but I thought I was going to anaphylactic shock. Administered the EpiPen, and then minutes later felt fine. I was like, what the hell? I was like, it went from one end to the spectrum to the other. The ambulance come, but when they took all my blood levels and everything, they was like, no, I don't think it's anaphylactic shock. There was it could have just been a panic attack. But for me, it actually calmed me down. I don't know, maybe I just in that moment, but it can be really hard, isn't it, to distinguish it?
I think it can be really hard to work out the difference between the two in that scenario, because that's quite an extreme scenario. Because obviously we can see, we see children when they come through clinic and they're really anxious about having a food challenge, for example, or a skin prick test, and they might, particularly if they're having a food challenge, they might think they're having a reaction to the food, but just because they've got themselves really anxious, which is why they do blind challenges. But in that scenario, when you're there and you think you're having an anaphylactic reaction, just take your pen. I mean, it's not going to do any harm. It's not going to hurt you if you take adrenaline when you don't need it, but it will do if it's the other way around. So I think, in that situation where you don't know what's going on and you think you're having a reaction to food and you think you need your pen, just take your pen. Just do it.
Yeah.
Because
I know,
at the end of the day, adrenaline is a harm for most people, unless they have a heart condition. Adrenaline is a really, it's a harmless substance. It's a substance we make all the time ourselves. Get an adrenaline rush by going on rides at, a theme park. So you're not going to do any harm by doing that. But then trying to afterwards reflecting is probably the really important thing. Was it a reaction? What happened? What did I eat the food? Did I not eat the food? But if you've not had an anaphylactic reaction before, you don't know what it feels like.
Yeah, I probably still don't know what it feels like. Maybe I don't know. Maybe it was to this day. I honestly thought I felt like I couldn't breathe, but I didn't have any hives. But then I'm like, I don't know. Do you need to tick off the hives, the swelling before you get to not breathing? I don't know. It's a tricky one.
It is a tricky one. Yeah, there are certain criteria that you need to meet it to say that somebody's had an anaphylactic reaction, and usually it's a number of systems that but you don't always have vomiting, you don't always have hives, and so unless you have bloods taken to look at tryptase levels or something like that, you might not.
Oh yeah,
never
they
know.
did that. Yeah, they actually took my blood. But then it come back fine. I think that's what they was looking for.
Yeah, so possibly that's why they said it wasn't an anaphylactic reaction. But like you said, the advice in that situation is it's hard, isn't it? Just
use the EpiPen, yeah. Because I only realised till afterwards it isn't harmless. I spoke to Professor Adam Fox when I started the podcast back in February, and he said it as well. And it's such an eye opener because people are so scared of using it, thinking about what the consequence is. But even if for example, say if it was a parent and they think the kid's having an anaphylactic shock and the kid feels saying he can't breathe, if they use it on the kid, is it the same problem? Even if the kid is a panic attack and the parent uses adrenaline on the kid, there's still no harm there. Is that correct?
Well, as far as I know, disclaimer, okay. I'm not a medic.
Okay.
But yes. As far as I know, you might want to talk to your own clinician about this. But yeah, because of course the doses for the children's pens are much smaller than the doses for the adults. So this is what I've been told as well, that actually your adrenaline, if you take adrenaline, it is a harmless. So it's not going to
that's
hurt
what
you if you
it's
take
what
it.
I've kind of heard as well. When someone kind of comes in and finally gets the support for their kind of the mental health and the kind of the allergies, how do you find out what therapy is right for them? I know like there's obviously like CBT. How is it off assessment? How do you find out what is right for that person?
Again, that is a really good question, because as psychologists we can offer. We're often, if we're trained in psychological therapy, we're trained in a particular one, but there are other things that we could use as well. So there is CBT, but there's also other types of therapies that are complementary as well. So you can, do CBT with a little bit of acceptance therapy, for example, or so a bit of mindfulness or a bit of self-compassion therapy. So there's lots of things that might be able to work. What we would do to start off with is just find out from the child or from the parent what the issue is. What is the problem? What are the difficulties? What are driving those difficulties? What are they having problems with? What would they like to be able to be doing? We can then see what might be the best type of therapy, but we can also talk to them about, well, this is CBT and this is what you would need to do for CBT. Is this something that you feel that would be right for you? So it's always done in collaboration with the child or parent or adult, whoever you're seeing. It's always a collaborative process. They have to go along with you. They have to want to be able to do it, and they have to feel as if that this might be helpful for them. Because if they really don't like it, CBT is not for everybody. And if they really don't get on with it, it's not really going to work, and something else might work better. But there are certain things that certain types of therapies are good for. So the psychologist would do a sort of assessment and talk to the child or the parent and work out what it is that needs to be, what they need help with, and then what's going to be the best type of therapy.
Yeah, because I got a question like earlier today, and it was about kind of like, how do you kind of manage that anxiety abroad, when you're in a different country, and it can be really difficult. For me, it's obviously like making sure you've got like the allergy cards, or is there any kind of like, I hear a lot of people kind of talk about like box breathing, and is there any kind of techniques where you can really kind of ease that anxiety a little bit?
I think anxiety techniques that are going to help with anxiety will help with anxiety wherever you are, whether you're in this country or abroad, and what works for you. There are certain things that you could do, like planning and making sure that you feel comfortable and confident in what you're doing. I say if you're going abroad, having translation cards and things like that are really helpful. But anything that's going to help reduce anxiety that you find helpful. And as I say, I would recommend going on to Anaphylaxis UK's website and having a look at the information they've put on about anxiety and how to manage it, and that work out what sort of how is helpful for you, and then use those techniques wherever you are.
Yeah. Within your kind of like 25 years, obviously kind of the studying kind of the mental health and within kind of food allergies, what has been kind of the most kind of shocking statistic, or kind of anything which is kind of really kind of stood out and kind of within the 25 years which you remember?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think what I found the most with this condition, and I as a health psychologist, we work to, I mean, my specialist area is allergy and asthma, but we do work a lot with other long-term conditions, diabetes, coronary heart disease, those sort of lifestyle conditions where health behavior change is important. And I think with allergy, what struck me the most is the fear that is always seems to go hand in hand with allergy that isn't there in some of those other conditions. And I think it's just the nature of it. It's like you can avoid a cat if you're allergic to a cat, but you can't stop eating. So, and the things you might be allergic to are hidden, and you can't often see them, and you don't know whether the next time you eat something, even if you take all the precautions, you might find that you eat something that is going to cause a really serious reaction. And I think, you know, the fear that goes with that has probably been the most eye-opening thing about this condition. And then, you know, we have a huge amount of fatalities from asthma, for example. They don't hit the news like peanut allergy fatalities do, or nut allergy fatalities. And again, that's probably part of that, maybe part of that whole world of allergy and how it can create that anxiety and that fear. I think that's been quite, and talking to people and talking about their experiences is really humbling. And then working out how we can help people is really rewarding. It's just such a rewarding field to work in, and you know, working with mums who are so anxious they can't even think about going out to eat at a restaurant with their child, and fearing the worst or every minute of every day, and they're working with them, and then, you know, 5 years down the line, seeing them and their little boys growing up, and they're going on holidays and they're doing everything they want to, and they're having a really good time. And that's just why we do what we do. So yeah, right. It's been a fascinating area to work in, definitely.
Yeah, and it must be amazing to kind of see how the conversation has changed over the last 25 years from where it was to kind of where it is now. It must be a massive shift.
It is a massive shift, and one actually I'm quite proud of. Because it's like, well, me and other people, we did that. You know,
that's amazing. Yeah,
we went out there and said, this is an issue. This is, you know, as clinicians, you need to think about this in your patients, in your parents. They're going to feel anxious. They're going to feel worried. They're going to have poor quality of life. You need to be mindful of this. And 25 years ago, they weren't really thinking about it. And now, as I said, everybody wants a psychologist, which is, you know, I think I've been to 4 conferences so far this year already, and I've got about another 3 later on in the year where I've been asked to speak all about the work we're doing, and they're all clinical sort of conferences. So that just shows how important the medics, the clinicians now see psychologists and see psychology in this field. They take it very seriously.
Yeah, I don't think I asked this question before. I've asked quite a lot of questions, but I want to ask in regards to why is there a lack of clinical psychologists within the allergy space? It's just a funding issue. There is no specific funding for psychologists to have hours within an allergy clinic. So as part of your normal funding that will come through to the hospital for your psychologists, they'll be seeing all sorts of patients, but they'll have some dedicated time for certain patients, for certain types of patients with certain conditions. Allergy is not one of them. So although the psychologist might be there that you could refer to, there might be a really long waiting list. They don't have any specific time. So there are only a small number of hospitals within the UK where there is some funding, and that, like the Evelina, has come from other places. It's not come sort of through the NHS. It's come through sort of charity funding and other sorts of funding. But where we do have psychologists, we're showing, one, a massive need. You know, they're inundated with patients. They're saying they could see more, if they had more funding, they'd see more. If they can see more and see them earlier, that's going to be more helpful. They would be able to help reduce anxieties before they even got really high. So it is just a funding issue, and it's for the allergy clinics as well. It's just it's underfunded and under resourced as a condition, as an area. As a whole,
yeah.
No, that's really insightful to get your question. Honestly, it's been great to kind of pick your brain. I did have a few questions which a few of the audience sent in, so I hope you don't mind.
Yeah,
I think we might have touched upon a lot of the questions which have been spoke about. But I'm going to see if I can get the questions up now. I don't know if you can see that on camera. There's quite a few.
Oh my God.
Oh my God. We're obviously, we're not going to go by one. I think you'll be here all night, and I think you'll be sick of me by the end of it. I think a lot of the stuff, like from looking at it, we've kind of touched upon. Is there a link between allergies and eating disorders? That was by Maddie.
Good question. Yes. Yeah, and there's some recent research. I think actually a review paper's just been published on this to look at this link. And yes, there is. There does seem to be a link between the two. What are the reasons? Well, I think if you have an allergy, and if you've got a young child in particular, it can lead to some picky eating. They don't really want to try new things, a bit of fear of food. And so that can lead to sort of fussy eating, picky eating, not wanting to try new foods, so having quite a restrictive diet. And so you can imagine as, a child gets a little bit older, that might turn into sort of more serious eating disorders like anorexia. There's also the flip side of that. There might be cases where, you have children with eating disorders who maybe use having an allergy as almost an excuse. So, well, I can't eat dairy because I'm allergic to it. And that means they can cut out all of those foods that have high calories. So there is this link. There is some research. There isn't a huge amount of research, but there is, and probably a growing need to have a look at this and work out what type of eating disorders and what's driving it. Is it that it's a fear of food to start off with because of the allergy, and then that's just spilling over into other things? We need to have a look. But there is certainly a link.
I can definitely imagine kids using it as like, I've got a food allergy. I don't want to eat this. Like trying to get them to eat any wheat, trying to get them to eat the veg.
Dairy. Yeah, that cuts out pretty much, most of the foods.
Honestly, like 99% of it is anxiety. It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah,
I think
it is.
The amount of people which kind of
touched by it. When we started looking at this, as I said, it was very much looking at quality of life. And it wasn't until we started measuring anxiety that we just saw how high anxiety was, and it's not just in the mum. Although mums do tend to take part in our studies, if we can get dads to take part, we see similar things that dads are saying. They're quite anxious as well. That is the thing that's really important for us to manage, because it's the anxiety that stops you doing things. The quality of life is sort of the end product. It's the anxiety that can, if I'm too anxious, I don't want to do things that are going to make me anxious.
Yeah,
unfortunately, the only way to stop being anxious about something is to do it. Hey?
I know people have asked, obviously, do you think allergy parents should have better access to mental health care? We kind of touched upon that. Like, we should. We've been talking to some parents about this in interviews, and some adults, and they would like a psychologist just to be part of the team that you see at an allergy. When you go to an allergy clinic, the psychologist is there. That would be the perfect scenario, and that's what people are telling us that they would really like. So that's really our goal. That's what we're sort of working towards. That you see your dietitian, you see your clinician, you see the psychologist. That would be awesome. Do you find in America that they've got much better access to clinical psychologists within the allergy space?
This is the really interesting thing about the GAP study we're running, which is, it stands for Global Access to Psychological Services. So we're looking at this issue across lots of different countries and finding exactly the same. So Australia, Canada, America, as well as the UK, and then all across Europe and into sort of South America, such as Brazil, they're all telling us that they want to see somebody about things like anxiety, and they don't have access. So
it's not just a
everywhere.
UK problem. This is like,
no,
that's really fascinating, because I always just presumed like other countries had it better for some reason. I had this idea, I think there is a little bit of variability, because obviously healthcare systems work differently. And so we have the NHS. Some of the countries, European countries, have things similar to the NHS. And then other countries, you pay for your healthcare. But even looking at America compared to here, they're still saying access is really difficult. There's nobody to see because there's nobody to refer to. And so I've got to pay privately, and it's really expensive.
So
yeah, because I
yeah,
was looking at doing that. Like, it won't predominantly like for allergies, but then I was thinking the other day, should I get one for allergies? I don't know. Like, I don't think I struggle with it. Like, I'm more struggle about it, about like the anxiety of going abroad. I did go through a patch where it was quite bad about 6 months ago, but then, or maybe a year ago, but then I feel like it's kind of balanced out now. Like, it's weird. It comes in like drits and drabs. I think the final question I wanted to kind of speak to you was like, and this is from Rebecca, how do I promote a good relationship with food for my allergic child?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think being as open and talking about everything as much as possible. Don't hide anything. Don't, try and, just be open about it. As I say, avoidance can make anxiety much higher. So, and what we're trying to get across to clinicians now, and they're sort of saying the same thing, is that the language they use is really important. So we're trying to get across to not say you've got to avoid everything and you've got to read all your food labels and you've got to avoid all the may contain, you've got really serious allergy. Because you use that language and you're going to feel anxious. Yeah. So it's all about knowing your risk and managing it. So for example, you cross over the road, you don't just cross it without looking left, right. You'll check. Or if there's a crossing, you'll go to the crossing. So you manage your risk about crossing the road. And allergy is exactly the same. How can you manage your risk to reduce it as much as possible? And talking to your child about all of those sorts of things and all the foods they can eat and maybe the foods that they can't eat and what might happen and what might not happen in a way that is completely open can just help make sure that no conversations forbidden, because otherwise they're just going to have questions they want to ask and not feel like they can ask them and then get anxious about it. So I think that's the advice I'd give.
No, that's incredible. Honestly, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast, Rebecca, to kind of pick your brain about anxiety. Obviously, you're 25 years, obviously, kind of studying it. So honestly, I really appreciate your time today. If anyone wants to kind of follow you, are you on Twitter? Are you on?
I am on Twitter.
Instagram?
I am on Twitter. I really ought to put more on Twitter. That goes up and down. It tends to. At a conference, I'll go on Twitter. If you do follow me on Twitter, you'll usually find pictures of the countryside, the dogs.
Yeah.
That sort of thing, because we do live in the countryside. But please, do follow me on Twitter. I will try and, particularly when I'm at conferences, try and put stuff out. We also use Twitter quite a lot for recruitment. If we're running studies and we want people, parents or patients to take part in our online studies, we'll recruit through there as well. So please do follow me.
No, that's incredible. Honestly, I loved having you on the podcast, and I'll keep you posted, and hope everyone enjoy the podcast, and make sure to click that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any future episodes every Monday morning. So thank you so much, Rebecca, for coming on.
That's all right. It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Dan.